He canceled my resort trip and called me an old fool, so I used my 40 years of industry secrets to lure him into a $422,650 trap. Watch a master of hospitality turn a family betrayal into a cinematic lesson in professional karma. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The email notification pinged while I had my hands buried in the engine of my 1967 Mustang. Oil stained my fingers, the smell of metal and grease thickened the air, while the low hum of crickets drifted through the open garage door. This garage was my sanctuary, the only place where the world made sense. Then I saw the subject line on my phone screen: reservation cancellation, Sapphire Shores Resort. I wiped my hands on a rag and tapped the screen with a trembling thumb. Your reservation SR47832 for June 15th to June 17th has been canceled at the request of Mr. Derek Turner, my son-in-law. I stood there for a long moment, the heavy wrench still gripped in my hand, trying to make sense of the words. I had booked that oceanfront suite 3 months ago. It cost me $2,340 for a Father's Day weekend, money I had set aside for a specific purpose. It was supposed to be just me, the water, and my camera. It was my one chance to photograph the sunrise without anyone telling me I was wasting my time or that I was too old to be chasing light. Through the workshop window, I could see the terrace of my own house. The lights were on, casting a warm glow over the deck furniture. Derek was there, along with his mother, Brenda, and his business partner, Scott. They were sitting around the outdoor table with wine glasses catching the porch light, laughing about something. I walked across the lawn toward them, the grass damp against my shoes. The June evening was warm, sticky with that heavy humidity rolling in from the bay. It was my bay and my house, though you wouldn't know it from the way they had arranged themselves. Derek sat at the head of the table like he owned the property. Brenda was holding court beside him, and Scott had his feet up on my expensive deck chairs. Derek saw me first. His smile was too wide, too pleased with itself. "Frank, we were just talking about you," he said, his voice dripping with a false heartiness that made my skin crawl. I kept my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I got an email," I said, "from Sapphire Shores." "Oh, that," Derek replied, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. "Yeah, I had to rebook the place. Frederick Walters, the investor I've been courting for months, finally agreed to a meeting. He's available August 20th through 22nd. It's a huge opportunity for the company, Frank. You can go to the beach anytime. There's a perfectly good pier right here in Sarasota." He took a long sip of wine, my wine, from my cellar. "This is business, Frank. Real business. Not like—" He gestured vaguely toward my workshop, tinkering with old cars and taking pictures of birds. Brenda leaned forward, her face arranged in what she probably thought was sympathy, but looked more like a sneer. "Forget about the beach trip, old fool," she said. "Derek is doing something important here. You understand, don't you? At your age, you should be taking it easy anyway. You don't need to be off at some resort by yourself." Scott snorted into his glass, trying to hide his laughter and failing miserably. I looked at my daughter Valerie. She sat at the far end of the table, staring down at her plate. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't even looked up since I arrived. Her fingers twisted the stem of her wine glass around and around, a nervous habit she'd had since she was a child. "Valerie," I said quietly. She glanced up, her eyes wide and full of something that looked like a plea. But Derek cut in before she could speak. "Val knows how important this is, don't you, honey? The Turner Strategic Solutions contract with Walters could save the company. Your father understands. He's a businessman, or he was, before retirement made him soft." The way he said it, the casual cruelty wrapped in that thin layer of false concern, hit me harder than the cancellation. They all thought I was finished. They thought I would just accept this, roll over, and be the harmless, fading old man they wanted me to be. "I see," I said, my voice as cold as the ocean at midnight. Derek's smile broadened. He thought he'd won. They all did. Even Valerie looked at me with a sense of relief, glad there wouldn't be a scene. She was happy her father was too tired and too worn down to fight back. "Good," Derek said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "I knew you'd understand. Now, Scott, What did you say about the quarterly projections for the Walters pitch? I walked back to the workshop without another word. Behind me, their conversation resumed, punctuated by more laughter and the clinking of glasses. My hand was remarkably steady as I cleaned my tools and put everything back in its precise place. The Mustang sat there, half restored and patient. It had waited 58 years to be beautiful again. It could wait a little longer. Inside my chest, something cold and precise was clicking into place, like the gears of a well-oiled machine. I wasn't just a retired old man playing with cars. I had spent 40 years in the hospitality industry, building a network that stretched from coast to coast. Derek thought he was a player. He thought his little consulting firm made him a shark. He had no idea what kind of game he had just started. I went to my room, which felt more like a guest room now, even though I had bought this house with money I earned through decades of hard work. I opened my laptop. The cancellation email was still there, a digital insult. I opened my contacts list. Diana Shaw's number was still there, along with dozens of others from my years at Coastal Luxury Group. I knew resort managers, hotel owners, and head concierges who remembered when I had launched their careers. These were people who owed me favors and knew exactly what I was capable of when I chose to act. I pulled out a legal pad and started making lists, names, numbers, dates, and possibilities. Derek thought being married to my daughter gave him leverage. He thought he had the right to treat me like furniture in my own home. He was wrong. The clock on my nightstand read 11:47 p.m. as I made my first move. By the time the first light of dawn started creeping through my window, I had 17 pages of notes. The plan was elegant, thorough, and it would hurt him exactly where he deserved to be hurt. I smiled for the first time since reading that email. Derek wanted to play businessman? Fine. Let's see how he handles playing against someone who actually wrote the rules. I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't from anger anymore. It was the thrill of the hunt. I remembered the last year at Coastal Luxury Group when we orchestrated the acquisition of a competitor's entire resort chain through nothing but patience and well-placed phone calls. I still had that edge. Around 4 a.m., I found myself thinking about the first time Derek had called me an old fool. It wasn't to my face back then. It was 2 years ago during Thanksgiving. I'd come back from the hallway and heard him in the kitchen talking to Scott. The old fool wants to give Valerie advice about the kids' education, Derek had said, his voice dripping with contempt. Like he knows anything about raising children in today's world. He's just taking up space in that house, living off his pension and playing with his little cars. Scott had laughed that same sycophantic laugh. "When are you going to make your move on the property?" he'd asked. "Soon," Derek replied, "once I establish power of attorney." He's getting forgetful. It won't be hard to convince Valerie he needs help managing his affairs. I had stood in the dark hallway for 10 minutes after that, my slice of pie forgotten, watching them through the crack in the door. I watched my son-in-law plot to steal my life while he ate at my table. I should have acted then, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself he loved Valerie, and that was enough to keep the peace. I was wrong about that too. Now, I looked at the brochure for Sunset Haven I'd found buried in the trash weeks ago, a senior living facility. Brenda had been highlighting the prices in yellow. They weren't just taking my vacation. They were trying to erase me entirely. I picked up the phone and dialed Diana Shaw's personal number. "Frank? Is that you?" Diana's voice was sleep-heavy but immediately alert. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "I know the time, Diana," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I need a favor, a big one. It involves the Sapphire Shores Resort and a man named Derek Turner. I need you to help me arrange a very special event for him." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard her sit up in bed. "You sound like the old Frank Harrison," she said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "The one who used to make people tremble in their boardrooms. What do you have in mind?" The next morning, I was back in the garage, the picture of a docile retiree. I watched through the open door as Derek and Scott left for the office, their suits sharp and their faces full of unearned confidence. They didn't even look toward the workshop. To them, I was just a part of the landscape, as relevant as a lawn ornament. Once their car cleared the driveway, I went back to my legal pad. The plan required precision. It wasn't enough to just stop Derek. I had to let him destroy himself. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I called Michael Burns, a private investigator I had used years ago for corporate due diligence. He was semi-retired now, but for me, he'd always answer the phone. Michael, I need everything you can find on Turner Strategic Solutions, I told him. Bank records, client lists, and any recent filings. I also need you to look into a notary in Tampa named Patricia Vance. Michael didn't ask why. He just told me he'd have the first round of data by the end of the week. While he worked, I focused on the resort. Diana Shaw had confirmed that the conference room and 87 rooms were available for the August dates Derek wanted. I had her put a hold on all of them under his name, but with a very specific payment structure that used the credit line he had so arrogantly established at the hotel. I spent the rest of the day working on the Mustang, but my mind was miles away. I was remembering 2008. I was sitting in a Miami hotel suite with Richard Walters, Frederick's father, watching his entire business empire crumble in real time. The financial crisis had hit him hard, and his hotels were going under one by one. "I'm finished, Frank," Richard had told me, his voice hollow. 3 generations of building, gone. I had looked at his spreadsheets and his debt. Then I had picked up the phone. By morning, I had secured him a $230,000 bridge loan, backed by a personal guarantee on my end. It kept his flagship property afloat just long enough to restructure. It took him 5 years to recover. But he did. "I owe you everything," he had said. "My son Frederick will know this." Derek didn't know that story. He'd never asked about my career. He'd never wanted to hear about the decades I'd spent building relationships in an industry where reputation was the only currency that mattered. To him, I was just an obstacle, a resource to be exploited until I could be discarded. That afternoon, Valerie came into the garage. She looked tired, the shadows under her eyes darker than usual. "Dad," she said, leaning against the Mustang, "Derek told me about the resort. He said you were okay with it." "Are you really?" I looked at her, and for a second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to show her the 17 pages of notes and the PI's number. But I saw the way she was holding herself, the tension in her shoulders. She was trying so hard to hold her world together. If I broke it too soon, she'd be caught in the collapse. "You know me, Val," I said, giving her a gentle smile. "I'm an old fool who likes his cars. I'll survive." She flinched at the words "old fool." "I'm sorry he said that," she whispered. "He's just stressed. The business it's not doing well. This Walters deal is everything to him." I nodded slowly. "I know it is, sweetheart. I know exactly how much it means to him." She stayed for a few more minutes, talking about the kids, but the air between us was thick with the things we weren't saying. By Thursday, Michael Burns called me back. "Frank, you were right to look into this," he said. "Turner Strategic Solutions is hemorrhaging money. They're $127,000 in debt, and 3 of their biggest clients are threatening lawsuits for breach of contract. But that's not the worst part." My heart tightened. "What is it, Michael?" He sighed. "Derek took out a loan against your house, Frank. $45,000. He used a forged power of attorney. The notary, Patricia Vance, is a known quantity for this kind of thing. She'll stamp anything for $800. I gripped the edge of my workbench until my knuckles turned white. He had moved faster than I anticipated. He wasn't just planning to take the house. He was already spending the equity. The betrayal was a cold weight in my stomach. He had sat at my table, drunk my wine, and stolen the roof over my head while I was sleeping in the next room. I should have been furious, and a part of me was, but the professional in me took over. He'd given me the rope he needed to hang himself. This wasn't just a business dispute anymore. This was criminal. I called Edward Glenn, my attorney. He was a shark with a steel gray soul, exactly the man I needed. I met him in his office on Tamiami Trail, a space that smelled of expensive leather and old paper. I laid out Michael's report on his desk. Glenn read through the documents without changing his expression. "This is fraud, Frank. Criminal fraud. You could have him arrested today. Identity theft, forgery, unauthorized use of property as collateral. He could do 5 years minimum." I leaned back in the leather chair. I know I could, Edward, but I want something more permanent. I want to protect my assets irrevocably, and I want Derek to realize exactly what happens when you try to erase a man like me. I want a living trust, and I want it sealed tight. I want every legal avenue he thinks he has to be dead-ended. Glenn's eyes sharpened. You want to play the long game? Exactly, I said. We spent 3 hours mapping it out. We would transfer everything I owned into the trust. The house, my savings of $380,000, and my investment portfolio worth $620,000. I would be the trustee and beneficiary for life, with Valerie as the sole heir, but with specific provisions that excluded any spouse from inheritance or management. It was an ironclad legal fortress. Glenn also suggested a neutral financial advisor to handle the immediate management, just to add another layer of protection. I'm ready, I told him. Let's get the paperwork started. As I drove back to the house, the Mustang's engine purred with a new carburetor I'd installed the day before. I felt a strange sense of calm. The board was set. Derek thought he was moving toward a massive victory, but he was actually walking into a cage of his own making. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was celebratory. Derek was practically vibrating with excitement. He'd received a confirmation from the resort for the August dates. To new beginnings, he said, raising a glass of my expensive Cabernet. Brenda beamed at him, and Scott clapped him on the back. I raised my glass too. To new beginnings, I echoed. Derek met my eyes, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in him. He was wondering why I wasn't fighting back. Then he dismissed it, convinced that he had finally broken me. He had no idea the check was about to come due. By July 10th, the legal fortress was complete. I had spent days in meetings, signing 47 pages of documents that effectively removed Derek's hands from my throat. Margaret Chen, the financial advisor Edward Glenn recommended, was a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for managing estates 10 times the size of mine. She didn't blink when I told her about the forgery. She just moved the money. Every dollar of my $140,000 home value and my combined $1,000 in liquid assets was now under her professional watch. Derek could try to file all the papers he wanted. He'd find himself hitting a brick wall of corporate lawyers and ironclad trusts. But the protection of my assets was only the first phase. Now it was time for the counterattack. I called Frederick Walters. It had been 4 years since we'd spoken at his father's funeral, but the warmth in his voice was immediate. Uncle Frank, he said, using the title I'd held since he was a boy. It's so good to hear from you. I need to ask you about a man named Derek Turner, I said. Frederick's tone shifted, becoming professional and guarded. Turner Strategic Solutions. He's been hounding my office for 8 months. Persistent, I'll give him that. Why do you ask? He's my son-in-law, I replied. There was a long pause on the other end. Oh. Frank, I'm sensing this isn't a recommendation. I told him the truth. I told him about the Father's Day cancellation, the names I'd been called, and the forged loan against my house. I told him about the senior living brochure. Frederick's voice was like ice when he spoke again. He's telling people I've agreed to a meeting at Sapphire Shores on August 20th. I haven't agreed to anything. I know, I said, but I want you to go. I want you to walk into that resort on that day and pretend you've never heard of him. Frederick laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're not asking me to destroy him. You're asking me to let him destroy himself in front of everyone who matters. My father always said you were the most ruthless negotiator he ever met. It would be my pleasure, Uncle Frank. With Frederick on board, I made the next series of calls. This was the part I enjoyed the most. I called Marcus Jenkins, Derek's biggest competitor. I used a fake name, Robert Chen, and claimed to be Derek's new assistant. Mr. Jenkins, I'm calling to invite you to an exclusive networking event at Sapphire Shores Resort, August 20th through 22nd. All expenses covered. Mr. Turner wants to mend bridges and discuss some potential industry collaborations. Jenkins was skeptical at first. Derek Turner wants to mend bridges? The same guy who tried to poach my lead developer last year? Precisely, I said. He realizes he made mistakes and wants to make it right. It'll be a high-profile event. I made the same call to 7 other competitors Derek had crossed, 3 clients he had defrauded, and 2 business journalists I knew from my days at Coastal Luxury Group. I told them all the same story. Derek was hosting a grand reconciliation event. By the end of the day, I had 15 firm confirmations. People were curious. They wanted to see what Derek was up to, and the promise of a free weekend at a luxury resort was too good to pass up. Diana Shaw at the resort was handling the back end. She'd set up a welcome banner with Derek's name in 48-point font and personalized itinerary cards for every guest. The total cost was climbing toward $225,550, all of it billed to the credit line Derek had opened in the company's name, backed by the fraudulent loan. Meanwhile, at the house, the tension was starting to show. Derek and Scott were huddled over laptops late into the night. They were selling things. Scott's BMW was replaced by a battered 10-year-old Honda. Brenda's jewelry started disappearing. They were desperate for cash to fund their presentation and the resort deposit they thought they were making. I brought them coffee, playing the helpful, bumbling father-in-law. I saw their revenue projections over Derek's shoulder. Pure fantasy. They were building a house of cards on a foundation of lies. "Thanks, Frank," Derek would say without looking up, his tone suggesting I was no more important than the guy who mowed the lawn. I'd just smile and walk away. The real explosion happened on July 17th. I was in my workshop, the Mustang's body now prepped for its deep blue paint, when I heard Derek screaming from the terrace. "What the hell is this?" he roared. I kept working, the sound of the buffer masking my own breathing. Through the window, I saw him pacing wildly, a letter clutched in his hand. Scott was beside him, looking like he was about to throw up. Brenda had come out too, her face tight with worry. The letter was from the bank. Edward Glenn had filed a lawsuit against them for failing to properly verify the power of attorney documents. The bank, terrified of the liability, had immediately voided the loan and was demanding full repayment of the $48,200 principal and interest within 45 days. I watched Derek's face turn a deep, unhealthy purple. That vein in his forehead was bulging. He was in full meltdown mode. They had already spent most of that money on their preparations, the new office furniture, the designer suits, the travel expenses. It was all gone. And now the bank wanted it back. I allowed myself a small cold smile as I tightened a bolt on the Mustang's engine. This was just the opening move. The real game hadn't even started yet. Derek was on the phone, likely screaming at some poor bank teller, while Scott sat on the deck furniture with his head in his hands. They were starting to realize the ground was shifting beneath them, but they had no idea I was the one pulling the rug. That evening at dinner, the silence was heavy. Derek barely touched his food. Brenda kept shooting me suspicious glances, her eyes narrowing every time I asked for the salt. She was trying to figure out if I had anything to do with their sudden reversal of fortune. "Is everything okay?" Valerie asked, her voice small. "Fine," Derek snapped. "Just a minor business complication. Nothing we can't handle." I sipped my water and looked at him. "I'm sure a man of your talents will find a way, Derek," I said. He glared at me, but he didn't say anything. He still thought I was the old fool. He thought this was just bad luck. He couldn't imagine that the man he had dismissed as a relic was currently orchestrating his complete and total downfall. August arrived like a heavy blanket of heat. In the workshop, the Mustang was finally finished. The deep blue paint sparkled in the sunlight, and the engine purred with the precision of a Swiss watch. It was a masterpiece of restoration, a testament to what patience and attention to detail could achieve. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather smelling of newness and hard work. I was ready. Derek, Scott, and Brenda were not. They spent the first 2 weeks of the month in a state of frantic activity. They took out another high-interest loan of $52,000 to cover the bank's repayment demand. I knew because I'd photographed the paperwork Scott had left on the kitchen counter while I was pretending to look for the coffee filters. On August 15th, Derek received his final confirmation from Sapphire Shores. He was giddy. "This is it," he told Scott at breakfast. "Walters is confirmed for the 20th. We have the conference room, the accommodations for his team. It's all set. Once we close this deal, the debt won't even matter. We'll be in the big leagues." I watched him over the edge of my newspaper. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, unaware that the ticket in his hand was a forgery. Scott looked less convinced, his eyes darting around the room, but he nodded along. He was too deep in it now to pull back. That afternoon, Scott came into the workshop. He looked haggard, his usual smugness replaced by a desperate, hungry look. "Mr. Harrison, can I talk to you?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't stop polishing the Mustang's chrome. "You're talking, Scott." He shuffled his feet. "Look, we realize things have been a bit tense lately. The whole power of attorney thing. That was mostly Brenda's idea. We were just worried about you." I finally stopped and looked at him. Really looked at him. "And you're telling me this now because?" He swallowed hard. "We're in a bit of a tight spot. Just temporary. If we could get a short-term loan, maybe $50,000, we'd pay you back with double interest once the Walters deal closes." I stared at him until he started to sweat. "No," I said. The word was cold and final. Scott's face went through a dozen expressions: surprise, anger, and then a flash of genuine fear. "Mr. Harrison, you don't understand. If the company goes under, it affects Valerie too. We're family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Is that what you were thinking when you paid a notary $800 to forge my signature? When you and Derek planned to ship me off to a nursing home so you could sell my house?" Scott's face went the color of old newspaper. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He backed away from me, his hands shaking. "You're not as harmless as you pretend," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, Scott, I'm not," I replied. "Now get out of my workshop before I decide to add your name to the criminal complaint I'm preparing." He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled across the lawn like a kicked dog. I watched him go, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. They knew now that I had teeth, but they still didn't know about the resort. They still thought the August 20th meeting was their salvation. They were like men running into a burning building because they thought there was gold inside, not realizing I was the one who had lit the match. The morning of August 20th was clear and beautiful. Derek, Scott, and Brenda left the house early, their car loaded with presentation boards and desperate hope. Derek was wearing his most expensive suit, acting like a conqueror. I watched them pull out of the driveway from the workshop window. They were walking into a trap so perfectly constructed they wouldn't even see the bars until they were locked inside. I waited an hour. Then I went inside to see Valerie. She was sitting in the living room, staring at a brochure for a divorce attorney I'd left on the coffee table. "Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sat down beside her. "Valerie, you need to go to Sapphire Shores this afternoon. Why? What's going to happen?" "Just go," I said gently. "I've booked you a room. Watch what happens in the lobby at 2:00 p.m., then make your own decision." I didn't tell her more. She needed to see Derek for who he really was, without me narrating the collapse. I got into the Mustang and drove to the resort. The engine felt like it was part of me, a powerful, steady force. I arrived at 1:47 p.m. Diana Shaw was waiting for me in the lobby. "Everything is ready, Frank," she whispered. "The guests are starting to arrive." The lobby of Sapphire Shores was a masterpiece of luxury: marble floors, towering palms, and the scent of expensive lilies. And right there, impossible to miss, was the welcome banner. Turner Strategic Solutions exclusive networking event. I went up to my suite on the 5th floor, which had a perfect view of the reception area. I set up my camera on a tripod, the long lens focused on the main entrance. At 2:03 p.m., Derek's rental car pulled up. He stepped out, followed by Scott and Brenda. They looked like they were attending their own coronation. They walked into the lobby, and I saw the exact moment Derek saw the banner. He froze. His jaw dropped. He turned to the reception desk, where Diana was waiting with a professional, lethal smile. From my vantage point, I watched the scene unfold through the camera lens. Derek was gesturing wildly at the banner. Diana was pointing at her tablet, her expression one of polite confusion. I could almost hear her voice. "But Mr. Turner, the contract for the 87 rooms and the full property buyout was signed in June. Your guests are already checking in." Derek's face was turning that familiar shade of purple. "Guess," he shouted, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "I only booked a conference room." Just then, the first of the guests I'd invited walked through the doors. It was Marcus Jenkins, looking like the cat that had swallowed the canary. "Derek!" Marcus called out, his voice booming. "What a magnificent surprise! I didn't think you had it in you to host something this grand. Mending bridges, eh? I like it." Derek spun around, his eyes wide with horror. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "Your assistant called me," Marcus said, clapping a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Promised me an exclusive look at your new strategy. And look at this." He gestured to the room, where 3 more of Derek's competitors were now entering. Behind them was Sarah Collins, the business journalist, her notebook already out. Derek looked like he was having a stroke. He turned to Scott, who was backing away toward the elevators, his face pale and slick with sweat. "This is a mistake," Derek screamed. "I didn't invite these people." Diana Shaw didn't miss a beat. "Sir, we have the recorded confirmation calls from your office, and the credit card on file has already been authorized for the $225,550 total." Derek looked like he was going to collapse. $250,000? He gasped. Brenda was clutching her purse like a life jacket, her eyes darting around the room at the growing crowd of people Derek had spent years insulting or cheating. They were all there now, sipping the premium champagne Diana had provided, laughing and talking about the Turner Strategic Solutions Gala. It was a masterpiece of public humiliation. I decided it was time to make my entrance. I stepped out of the elevator and walked across the lobby, my linen suit crisp and my camera around my neck. Every eye in the room turned to me. Derek saw me and his entire body went rigid. "You!" he hissed, the word barely audible over the chatter of the crowd. I walked right up to him, a pleasant smile on my face. "Derek, I didn't know you'd be here. What a coincidence." "Coincidence," he roared, losing whatever shred of dignity he had left. "You did this. You set this up. You canceled my reservation and made this nightmare." I let a look of mild confusion cross my face. "Canceled your reservation?" "Derek, I believe you canceled mine back in June. Remember? You told me I was an old fool who should stay at the local pier." The lobby went silent. Every guest was watching us now. Marcus Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "This is your father-in-law, Derek? The one you told the chamber was senile?" Derek's mouth worked soundlessly. That was..." Sarah Collins was writing furiously. The embarrassment was palpable. I looked at Derek, my eyes cold. "You were right about one thing, Derek. I am old, but I spent those years building a reputation, something you've managed to destroy in less than an hour." Just then, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. Frederick Walters walked through the lobby doors. Derek saw him and a look of desperate hope flashed across his face. He scrambled toward him, Scott right on his heels. "Mr. Walters, thank God. There's been some confusion, but if we could just go to the conference room?" Frederick looked at him with the kind of cold indifference you'd show to a bug on a windshield. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do I know you?" Derek froze. I'm Derek Turner. We've been communicating for months." Frederick turned to me and broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Frank, there you are. Ready for that dinner at the seafood place you mentioned?" The silence that followed was exquisite. Derek stood there, completely erased, while the man he'd pinned all his hopes on embraced me like family. Frederick didn't even look back as we walked toward the exit. I caught one last glimpse of Derek's face through the lobby glass. He looked small, he looked broken, and most importantly, he looked exactly like the man he was, a fraud who had finally run out of lies. As we stepped out into the warm August air, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for years. The old fool had won, and I still had the rest of the weekend to enjoy the beach. The chaos in the lobby didn't stop when I walked out with Frederick. From the terrace of the resort restaurant, I could see the flashing lights of hotel security as they began to clear the crowd. Derek was a cornered animal, screaming at Diana Shaw about a refund he would never see. Every word he shouted was captured on a dozen different smartphones, a digital record of his meltdown that was already hitting the local business groups before the appetizers arrived. I sat across from Frederick, the ocean breeze cooling the heat of the day, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. "Frank, my father always said you were a surgeon with these things," Frederick said, lifting a glass of chilled white wine. "You let him hold the scalpel while you just watched him slip." I nodded, but my mind was on the cost of the victory. I had spent $225,550 of money that Derek thought was his, but was actually backed by the fraudulent loan he'd taken out against my house. Now that the bank had voided that loan, that $250,000 bill at the resort was sitting squarely on the shoulders of Turner Strategic Solutions. It was a debt they couldn't pay, a weight that would crush the firm into bankruptcy by morning. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Valerie. "I'm at the hotel. I saw him, Dad. I saw all of it." My heart gave a painful thud. I had told her to be there, but seeing her husband's soul laid bare in a hotel lobby was a trauma I wouldn't wish on anyone. I excused myself from Frederick and found her standing by the valet stand, her eyes red and her face pale. She looked at me, and I saw the girl she used to be, before Derek had spent 5 years convincing her that her own father was a burden. "He lied about the papers," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the surf. "He told me you signed them because you were starting to forget things. He told me it was for your protection." I reached out and took her hands. They were ice cold. "He didn't just lie to me, Valerie. He lied to you to get to me." I led her to a quiet bench, away from the noise of the lobby. I had a folder in my bag, the one with the PI's report and the copies of the forged signatures. I handed it to her. She flipped through the pages, her breath hitching as she saw the text messages between Derek and Scott. They were talking about the nursing home, about how the house would sell for at least $140,000, and how they would split the commissions once I was out of the way. She let the folder fall to her lap, her expression shifting from grief to a cold, hard clarity. "He was never going to stop, was he?" she asked. I shook my head. Men like Derek only stop when there's nothing left to take. As we sat there, a loud crash echoed from inside the lobby. Derek was being escorted out by 2 security guards, his suit jacket torn and his tie hanging loose. He saw us and tried to lung forward, but the guards held him back. "You ruined me," he screamed, his face a mask of pure rage. "You and your brat. You think you're so smart? You're nothing but a pair of leeches." Valerie stood up, her back straight and her chin high. "No, Derek," she said, her voice cutting through his screaming. "We're the owners of the house you're moving out of tonight." The fallout was a silent, professional execution. By Friday morning, the local business journals had the full story, complete with the leaked emails and the images of the forged documents. Turner Strategic Solutions was a ghost town. Their 3 remaining clients had terminated their contracts via email before the sun was even up. Reputation is a fragile thing in Sarasota, and Derek had smashed his into 1,000 pieces in front of the very people he needed to impress. I was back in my workshop, the Mustang finally finished and gleaming in the morning light. I was waiting. I knew the final confrontation was coming. It wasn't until 10 a.m. that the rusty Honda pulled into my driveway. Scott climbed out first, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Then came Derek. He didn't look like the shark anymore. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He walked into the garage, his footsteps heavy on the concrete. "You think you won, Frank?" Derek asked, his voice flat. "You think this makes you the big man?" I kept my back to him, focusing on a small smudge on the Mustang's fender. "I didn't think about winning, Derek. I thought about the bridge loan I gave Richard Walters in 2008. I thought about the 40 years I spent building a name that meant something. You thought business was about who you could step on. I knew it was about who you could lift up." Derek let out a harsh, dry laugh. "You're just a lucky old fool who had the right friends." I turned around then, the polishing cloth draped over my shoulder. "Luck had nothing to do with it," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I saw the power of attorney you forged. I saw the loan for $45,000. I saw the brochures for the nursing home. You tried to erase me from my own life, Derek. I just gave you the stage to erase yourself." Scott took a step forward, his hands raised in a plea. "Mr. Harrison, please. The debt is over $422,650 now with the resort fees and the penalties. We can't pay it. They're going to take everything. I looked at him with zero pity. You should have thought about that before you paid that notary in Tampa. I've already spoken to the district attorney. Scott, I suggest you find a very good lawyer, because I'm not the one you should be afraid of anymore. Derek's face twisted, a final flash of the old arrogance flickering in his eyes. Valerie won't let you do this, he sneered. She loves me. She'll choose her husband over a bitter old man every time. Just then, the door to the kitchen opened. Valerie walked out, holding a stack of packed boxes. She didn't even look at Derek as she set them on the porch. The divorce papers are on the kitchen island, Derek, she said. I want you and your mother out of this house by noon, or the police I called will help you pack. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions and quiet victories. Scott, sensing the ship was at the bottom of the ocean, turned state's evidence against Derek within 72 hours. He handed over the emails, the recorded calls, and the name of the notary who had taken the $800 bribe to stamp the forged power of attorney. In exchange for his cooperation, he was given immunity, but his career in Florida was over. He fled to Texas, leaving Derek to face the consequences alone. Derek didn't go down quietly. He tried to sue me for intentional interference with business relations, a move that Edward Glenn laughed out of court in less than 10 minutes. The judge was not amused when Glenn presented the evidence of the forgery. Derek was ordered to pay restitution of $53,400 for my legal fees and damages, a sum he didn't have and would never be able to earn. Turner Strategic Solutions officially filed for bankruptcy on September 3rd, the same day the office furniture was hauled away in a flatbed truck. Brenda was the last to go. I watched from the terrace as she loaded her belongings into a rusted sedan. She didn't say a word to me, but the look she gave me was filled with a poison that would have killed a lesser man. She still blamed me for destroying her son's future, never realizing that Derek had set his own future on fire the moment he decided I was an old fool who wouldn't fight back. I watched the taillights of her car disappear down the drive, and I felt the house grow lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Valerie and the kids moved back into their old rooms. It wasn't easy. There were tears and long nights of talking through the years of manipulation Derek had woven into their lives. But slowly, the shadows began to lift. We spent evenings in the garage, the kids helping me polish the Mustang, while Valerie sat on the workbench and told me about her day. She was rediscovering the father she thought she was losing, and I was rediscovering the daughter I had almost let slip away. The Mustang was finally road ready. I had spent 58 years waiting for this car to be what it was meant to be. It was more than just a machine. It was a symbol of everything that had been restored. The engine hummed with a deep, soulful growl that echoed off the garage walls. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the empty passenger chair. I didn't feel lonely. I felt powerful. I had protected my family, my home, and my dignity, and I had done it all while being exactly the old fool they thought I was. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Frederick Walters. Inside was a photograph of a new resort wing they were breaking ground on in Miami. He had named it the Harrison Suite. A small note was attached. For the man who knows that the best views are earned, not taken. I smiled and tucked the photo into the frame of the mirror in the hallway. It was a reminder that while some people try to erase you, others will make sure you're never forgotten. September arrived with a break in the Florida heat. The air was crisp, and the bay was a flat, shimmering mirror of silver and blue. I stood on the pier, the one Derek had said was good enough for me, and set up my tripod. The sun was just beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors that no camera could truly capture. I took my time, adjusting the aperture and the shutter speed, feeling the familiar weight of the camera in my hands. "Dad?" Valerie walked down the wooden planks, her arm linked with her eldest son. "Are you ready for the drive?" I looked at them and smiled. "In a minute, sweetheart. The light is perfect right now." I watched them walk to the end of the pier, their silhouettes sharp against the burning gold of the water. I had lost a vacation, a son-in-law, and a fair amount of sleep, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had my life back, on my own terms. I thought about Derek one last time. He was working at a car wash in Tampa now, living in a one-bedroom apartment and waiting for his probation officer to call. He had nothing. No business, no house, no family. He had tried to steal a future he hadn't built, and in the end, he had lost the present he didn't appreciate. I didn't feel hatred for him anymore. I felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Justice, I realized, isn't always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes it's just the truth coming home to roost. I turned my lens toward the Mustang parked at the foot of the pier. The deep blue paint reflected the sunset, making the car look like it was carved out of the ocean itself. It was a relic, an old thing that people had forgotten, but it was still here, and it was still beautiful, just like me. I clicked the shutter, capturing the moment when the light was at its strongest, just before it faded into the night. We piled into the car, the leather seats warm from the sun. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a confidence that made the kids cheer. We drove down the coast road, the windows down, and the salt air filling the cabin. I looked in the rearview mirror at the pier receding in the distance. I wasn't an old fool. I was a man who had survived the storm and come out the other side with his hands still on the wheel. The ocean stretched out to our left, infinite and full of a million possibilities. I didn't know what the next year would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. I was Frank Harrison, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I pressed down on the gas, and the Mustang surged forward, carrying us all into the cooling dark of the Florida evening. Everything was in its place. Everything was finally right. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.